Thank you, Richard, for sharing your Springfield story with us here today. And I think what we'd like to do to just get started is ask you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your connections to Springfield.
Sure. Well, my name is Richard McLean Wright Jr., and my wife and I have been living here. We bought this house in 2004, so we've been here for 14 years. We spent a year renovating the house. We didn't move in until after a year from the time that we bought the house. I also have family that was born, raised, and died and buried in Springfield, in Evergreen Cemetery, in the Old City Cemetery. So I feel a deep connection to Springfield and Jacksonville.
How long?
We lived here another time too. We lived over on 8th Street, 8th and Laurel on the corner. There's a two-story house, and we had the upstairs apartment. And this was in 1980, 81, and we were there for 2.5 years. And we just kept getting drawn back to the neighborhood. We love the old houses and the old feel of the neighborhood. When you walk around the neighborhood, you've got the old pavement underneath your feet and the old growth of oak trees and houses all around you. It's such a great ambience of the past.
So you said you have family that have deep roots here. Tell us about your family. When did they live here? Tell us their stories.
Well, you might not have wanted to ask that question. I might, but since I got involved in this program, I've been doing some research myself and digging into some family archives, and luckily, my family, they were really interested in keeping records. They had an old family Bible, and in the old family Bible, it was very common, I guess, in the 19th century to have a family Bible which you passed down, and you'd have the names of all your family in the Bible. So I have a copy of the picture from the family Bible, and I love it. I'll just share it with you here. It's hard to read, and it doesn't mean too much just glancing at it. It's just an old piece of paper.
All right.
But it's certified, if you notice on the back end of it. But it goes back to the first person there is Benjamin King, and he was born in 1824. And his wife was Elizabeth King. And actually, I think she was born in 24, he was born in 21. They were both born in Arlington, South Carolina. As far as I could see, I don't know if I'm reading that correctly. And they had a bunch of kids. They had Presley Rebecca, born in 44. They had Bernice, born in 46. They had Ivy, born in 48. Nina, born in 1850. Peter, 52. Elizabeth in 54. And Lily Agnes in 61. So, from that, Bernice came to Jacksonville. I don't know if the family came to Jacksonville in the 1800s, but I do know that Bernice, which would be my great grandmother, came to Jacksonville, and they had a house downtown. It was Adams Street and Main Street, and in the fire, which I think the fire was '01, burned a house down, and they moved to Springfield. They moved to 1738 Main Street, which is now called 1538 Main Street because they changed the addresses. And her and her husband, who was Richard McLean, lived there. And at some point, my great aunt, who was also a daughter of Bernice, moved into that house. And I think the great-grandmother moved over to Laura Street, which is where my grandmother was a child and where my father was born and raised, and my aunt was born and raised, and is still there. 1527 Laura Street. Was once upon a time 1727 Laura Street. So I came here in the 1960s as a child down to visit my grandma Bernice, and I love the way these names just keep getting passed around. And Rosa was my great aunt. And we came down, and Rosa was still alive when I was about 6 years old. I think she died in 66, which I would have been 8 and a half at that time. And we used to come down and visit. My Aunt Rosa lived on Main Street in the Main Street house, which was in 1538 Main, and my grandmother lived on Laura. And we'd come down, we'd go to my grandmother's house, and we would spend the night there, and we'd go visit my aunt, and we would sit out on the porch, and we would rock on the porch and talk and talk and talk. And my aunt had all these little sweetheart names for us. I was the little apple dumpling, and I think my sister was the peach dumpling, and my brother, when he came along, he was the cherry dumpling. And so whenever he came, she was like, and she was old and frail, and I was 6, 7 years old. So her husband died fairly young. He died about 52 years old, and so she was living there by herself. And according to my father's history, he was raised by her and my grandmother. There were some family problems, and primarily he was raised by my great aunt and my great grandmother. So I never knew my great grandmother, but I knew my great aunt, and spend a little bit of time getting to know her. She had the cats. There's cats all around Springfield. They grow in the alley. Everybody who lives in Springfield has cats. But there were cats back then, and Tiger was one of the cats. And there was an alley that went through, the back alley that went through Laura Street, and you can go from my grandmother's backyard porch down through the alley, walk down and cut through, which to me looked like a jungle when I'm 6 years old. It was just like a maze. It was like going through some sort of time tunnel and go into my aunt's back house. It was beautiful.
You talked about your father growing up here. What stories or anecdotes about growing up in Springfield have you heard?
Well, I've heard lots of stories. My father, he loved history, and so he was always saying, well, back when I was a boy. And so I heard these stories all my life, and then in 95, when he was about 71 years old, I made a cassette tape of him asking him questions about his childhood. And he told me about his childhood. He told me what a beautiful neighborhood it was. He knew the neighbors that lived on both sides of him. The Boyds lived on one side, and one of them was a superintendent of schools, one was a school teacher, one was a forester, and one of them, what was his name? It was a funny name. Graffa Boyd owned the first baseball, well, not the first, but owned one of the first baseball clubs of Jacksonville. And when it was time for a game, he had a truck, and they had some sort of organ instrument on the back, and they would ride the organ instrument around the neighborhood, around the city, and play "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." So they'd drum up some support. Fans come out and see the ball game. Also, right there where he lived on Pearl Street, the Postmaster General lived there. So another school superintendent. I don't know how you have two superintendents, but they did, I guess, at that time. There was a family called Conklin, and there was a blind young adult who was a virtuoso pianist. And his brothers were vaudevillian entertainers. I guess singers, actors, musicians, dancers, they did it all back then in the vaudeville time. And my dad would tell me about the theaters There were some movie theaters. Some of them doubled as vaudeville theaters and as well as movie theaters. I think there's a Capitol Theater that was right up here on Main Street between 7th and 8th. But if you took the trolley, if you got on the trolley and catch the trolley and go downtown, that's where all the action was. And I think they'd get off on Adams Street and go to Forsyth Street. And on Forsyth Street, that's where the Florida Theater is now. There was a string of theaters because the movies was the idiom of entertainment. And vaudeville was going out, and movies were the thing. And my dad remembered silent movies. There was an organist that played at the Florida Theater. His name was Jimmy Knight. Jimmy Knight. And he said that there would be a piano player playing when the movie was going on, and the words would be on the bottom. He'd read the words. And but when it came to the break, Jimmy Knight would come up out of the floor and be playing the magic organ, and the lights would change. They said it would be a different color. And he said it was just as gorgeous then as it is now. And I remember he told me he saw Frankenstein there, the original Frankenstein, and he said that was the most horrifying movie. Seeing that big old head of Frankenstein up on that huge screen. But I guess when you're 7 or 8 years old, that could be kind of frightening. There were 5 theaters there. One of them was a whole block long. It was called the Arcade, and it was just 1 block long, and it was like a long hallway on each side, and the theater was in the middle. Go figure, how could they spend that kind of money? But they packed the theaters. And during the Depression era, a little bit after the Depression, they had these giveaways. If you came to the movie, they would give you a dish. And you got your choice. You could have the salad bowl, or I don't know, the fruit cup bowl, the coffee cup, the saucer. And go to the movie multiple times and you collect them all. And they called it Depression era Chinaware. And my family had some of that. We may still have some of that. They were like the Our Gang group. He and his sister was a year older, and she was like, let's go do this, let's go do this, let's go. And he was like 4, and they would get on the trolley and they would go by themselves. I think it probably cost 5 cents to ride the trolley, and that might have been a 2-way. I remember my father told me for 10 cents you could get on the ferry, which is where not the Matthews, but the Main Street Bridge is, and he said you could ride the ferry all that for 10 cents. He said you go up on top and the breeze would be blowing. It would just be the most beautiful thing in the world. You feel like I am king of the world kind of thing. But anyway, one time they were downtown, and the policemen knew them. They knew a lot of the family. They knew his family, and the policemen ran them in. We're going to run you downtown. So they ran them in to the police office and called their parents. And their parents, because these kids are like 5 and 6 years old, running around downtown by themselves. It's a bustling downtown, so there were a lot of adults there. A lot of shops were there, Pennies and Learners and shoe shops and dry goods. My father tells me. Another time, there was not exactly a zoo, but we had an animal parade. Actually, it was like a zoo, a Springfield Zoo, and they had these carnival animals that carnivals wanted to get rid of, and Springfield would adopt them. There was one, the elephant, Miss Chick, and they took up a collection so that they could purchase Miss Chick, and they did. They purchased her, but they had some farm animals, cows and chickens. They had elephant, some exotic birds, and they had a bear. And on one occasion, my father and his sister were at the zoo area, and it was at the park, the Clutho Park we call it now, and my father disappeared, and nobody could find my father. And then there were a whole bunch of people over by the bear cage, and so they went over to the bear cage, and little Buddy, that was his nickname, little Buddy was in the bear cage. They had no idea how he got in the bear cage. I have no idea how he got out. He has no idea how he got out. All he knows, I said, well, what kind of bear was it? Was it a big bear? And he's so funny because he said to me, he says, well, to a 5-year-old, what do you call a big bear? He always answered a question with a question.
The zoo is at...
My
Clutho.
father.
No, the zoo is at Clutho Park, is that right?
I think the zoo was at Clutho Park, and I'm thinking it was over here, toward the hospital. There was also a large pool over there, and it was an acre pool. And I thought my dad misspoke. I mean, he's 71, but I said, an acre? He says, an acre. It was a large pool. He said it would probably fit 5,000 kids, he said. Yeah. And it wasn't all deep. You know, it was like to your knees. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it came up to your chest in some areas. But it wasn't like it was a 10-foot pool, 10 foot deep. But there was a pool there. In the summertime, all the kids would go out there to the pool. And he said there was always something going on. There was the Iceman, and the Iceman would be coming around daily, and they all had like a call, you know, the Iceman, and oh, the Iceman's coming in, go get the ice, and you had to go get the ice because you had to put the ice in your cooler, because you didn't have refrigerators, you had coolers, so you go out there and the Iceman would ship you off a 5-cent piece of ice, a 10-cent piece of ice, and depending how big your cooler was, and then there was the vegetable man, and the vegetable man do the same thing. Vegetables, get your vegetables, and the kids would, this was like a exciting part of the day. The kids would all run out there and run go get mom or grandma and get their vegetables. Ragmen, go out and get your rags, or go trade your rags, or there was the postman, and the postman's name was Pearson. And little Buddy used to follow around with Pearson and talk with him as he delivered the mail. And my father told me one occasion he was sitting on the porch. I had these rockers on the porches and swings. And Pearson came by and said hello to Mr. Buddy. He called him Mr. Buddy. And my dad asked him to come sit with him on the porch. And Pearson said, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Buddy, but I can't do that. And my father just, inquired, well, why can't you do that? You're my friend. How come you can't come and sit up on my porch? And Mr. Pearson, respectfully declined. But my dad always made a lot of friends. He was kind of a friend wherever he was. He was very outgoing and friendly. He went to Andrew Jackson, and in Andrew Jackson, he played in the band, and which incidentally, among my collectible stuff, I found a brochure of Andrew Jackson activities brochure dated 1938. In 1942, my dad graduated, and he went to sign up to the armed services. He went to the Navy. And I went to sign up, and they said, "Okay, kid, what do you do?" And my dad said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, what'd you do in high school?" He said, "Well, I played in the band." I said, "Okay, you're a musician. Go report to." So I went to report to such and such, wherever that was, and they said, "Okay, kid, play a B-flat scale." And he muddled through a B-flat scale and said, "Okay, kid, you're in. Go report to Fort." It just doesn't happen today. Today, he was in the South Pacific for 3 years. And he was lucky. He didn't have to see combat much that I know of. I don't know. They might have been playing, but they were the band, so they would play for all the dignitaries. Also, it was amazing because he was like a young kid, fresh out of high school. I don't know, played second chair trumpet, and now he was in this band with all of these professional musicians from New York City. Among them, was Blue Baron was a famous name, and members of his band were in that band. Jimmy Lungsford was another famous name, and members from his band were in that band. And so he got this opportunity to play with all these world-class musicians for 3 years. Afterwards, I'm sure he came back to Springfield for a little while, but like most of the returning military, he used the GI Bill and got his education. Because a college education will take you farther. And he was right, and it did. He was really smart. He got his education in biology. He became a salesman for a drug company, Merrill, and I think that's where he met my mother. My mother was a nurse. She was a pediatric nurse at in Washington, D.C., at a children's emergency room, and somehow they connected. I don't know if it was in D.C. She was from Charleston, South Carolina, and they got married, and they settled down in Charleston. And then we lived in Charleston for 10 years of my life, and then moved down here in 1967. We took some few vacations down here, and came and saw my grandmother, and Aunt Rosa, and my father's sister, who would lead him all around the town. She was a year older than him. She married the man that lived 2 doors down. So if you go to 1527, 2 doors down is Miss Strickland's house. And I don't know who the fella is there today, but I waved to him and said, by the way, my aunt married the man that lived in this house, and she lived 2 doors down. How often do you do that? I guess she'd known him her whole life. Because he was a few years older than her. And he was a pilot in World War II, and he got shot down, and the plane went up in flames, and he was burned on probably 95% of his body, and lost his arm, one of his arms to the propeller. And I just thought, as a kid, I'm like, God, how can he do anything? He's only got one arm. But he was as tough as nails. He drove a car, and he played tennis, and he became a professor at University of Florida, professor of agriculture. Real smart guy too. My Aunt Rosa's husband was in the Spanish-American War, and he was on the Maine. I thought he was a Rough Rider. I've got some pictures of one of my relatives in this cowboy outfit. I mean, he looks pretty rough. He's on a horse. He's got a 6-shooter, and he's got looking at you like, boy, don't mess with me. I thought he was a Rough Rider. But anyway, my Tom Livingston was Aunt Rosa's husband. He died at 52. When he came back from the Spanish-American War, he got a job in the train as a train clerk, carrying the baggage and things like that, handling the baggage, and which was a very respectable. It was a union job, and when he died, they sold his gold watch. The company, the railroad company, this practice they had, they would take your gold watch, instead of giving that to the widow, they would raffle. They would have everybody put in money, and they'd put in like $1 a piece. And that $1 was a lot of money in 1927, is the year he died. $1 was a lot of money, and they came up with $80, and then they would do a raffle, and whoever got chosen got the gold watch. But they presented an $80 check to the widow in 1927, and they were really proud. They come up with a beautiful letter of that, and it just tickles me how proud they were of that, and rightly so. And then also, she applied for his military benefits, and she got them. And I thought that was charming also, looking at the letter. And it says, for Tom Livingston, for his services at the United States of America during the Spanish-American War.
What were some of the kinds of things you did as a child when you came to visit?
Well,
And this would be in the 60s,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, I was amazed by the houses. Of course, we were part of the Mattel generation. You know, we had our plastic toys from Mattel and the Rock'em Sock'em robots, and so and every cereal box had some kind of toy in it. When we came down, it was kind of, we were in adult world, and back in those days when you were in the adult world, you just kind of learned to sit there and listen, and but I like to explore. So when I got a chance to get through the adult conversation, I would just meander off and explore. And these old houses were so many cool little nooks and crannies to explore, you know, with pocket doors and staircases and rooms.
So you
with,
would go inside?
I would. Oh yeah, we would inside the houses and explore, and I might have a little toy. I was a soldier or something I was playing with, and you know, go play with my little toy and find like a little niche and have that be like my theater, my stage there. And I was my sister was 2 years older than me, and we were both kind of a little afraid to venture all the way to my aunt's house by ourselves, because we were. She might have been 10, I might have been 8, the oldest, and it just seemed kind of daunting to go back there in the alley. The neighborhood was really nice back in those days. This is like the 60s. And somewhere right around the late 60s, early 70s, there seemed to be a change in the neighborhood. It seemed like the people weren't as nice. I heard more yelling out in the streets and people that just didn't seemed to be friendly. When my family came here, we would do family things. We would go down to St. Augustine and visit the fort. We would go to Silver Springs. Disney World hadn't been built yet, so there was really no interest in going to Orlando. We go to the what's the Wakia, Wiki Wachi. We go see the mermaids. That was always very interesting. We go to Gainesville and visit my my aunt Margaret and Uncle Albert. We go to the beach. And by the way, back in the 30s, there was no road that went to the beach. You had to take the train. So you go over to the Prime Osborne Convention Center, and you take the train down. I think they call it Beach Railroad, which later turned into Beach Boulevard. And they go to the beach and spend all. And actually, my father and his sister, his children, maybe they were like, I don't know, 6 and 7 or 8 and 10, would go down to the beach all by themselves. I don't know why they trusted them to do that. But I guess you put a lot more trust in kids to be able to get along and fend off, and you put a lot more trust in strangers to be able to support them and help them if there were a situation. He said they go down the beach and go swimming, and you have a change of clothes. They had bathhouses. You go to the bathhouse. Had rides down there. You'd ride the rides, and everything was like 5 cents. So if you had 50 cents, boy, you were set for the day. My Aunt Rosa, I found a receipt from her house. She had a tenant, and a lot of these elderly ladies after the war would take in tenants. The husbands would be off at war, or had passed away, and they'd taken a tenant as a way to make a living. And my Aunt Rosa took in a tenant, and I found the receipt, and it says, the state of Florida states that the rent for this will be no more than $3.50 a week. $3.50 a week, and that's 1941. And then in the 60s, I think my grandmother was renting houses for like $10 or $15 a week. And that's how much you needed to survive. My dad tells me 2 bags of groceries you could buy a week's worth of groceries for $2 or $3. And you'd have all you need. 2 big bags of groceries, $3.
Where did they do their grocery shopping?
It seemed like my father told me, Mike and Waffles up on Main Street. Mike's, it's a garage, and next door is part of the building is a Mediterranean restaurant, and that used to be a market, and you could go in there and, kind of like a quick market, where you get your basic things, and my dad said you could go in there, and they'd have live chickens, and you go in there and say, I'll take that one, and then you take the chicken and go out back.
Oh no.
And fix her up for you. So a different way of life.
So fast forward, you and your wife
Uh-huh.
decide to come here.
Right. I just think we always had an affinity for these beautiful old houses. Her family had some old houses that they lived in, and my family, my grandmother in South Carolina had an old house. It was an old farmhouse, but we loved that old house. I had to look, so we came and we looked around, and 2004, we had a hard time finding something, and then we ran across this. It was interesting. We're like walking. We're just walking around. And we walk by this house, the curtain is open, and there's a double bass in the window. And in the window, I think, was also a for sale sign. And it hadn't been on, this house had not been on any list that any realtors had shown us. We hadn't seen it on the internet. And so we said, well, let's go ask. So we came here and we asked, and there was a family living here. They were renting, they were hoping to buy, but it didn't work out. And their daughter played bass in the orchestra over at the School of the Arts, right over here, the Middle School of the Arts, La Villa School of the Arts. So anyway, we inquired, and the house was really condemned. There was no working shower. There was a bathtub. We had to redo a lot of the plumbing, AC, heating, knock down walls, and replace the door. Our front door, it was all rotted, and we took the beveled glass from in the middle of the front door and had a door built around it. And it's a beautiful door now, but that's the original glass. So we came here. We moved in the neighborhood. We enjoyed the political, the social and civic mindedness of the neighborhood. And as a matter of fact, we got involved. We actually started the Springfield Relay for Life, which was in I think it was about 2007, and we did that for about 7 or 8 years. Actually about 2015, so about 8 years. And we didn't go to a lot of parties. They have the First Friday parties. We don't go to a lot of the First Friday parties, but we did get involved in getting to know some of the people at the Improvement Association, and just our neighbors in the neighborhood. Became good friends with Joe Melinda, who sold his house to Drew Hunter right up on the park across from the bandstand. Gorgeous house. And he and I became good friends because I always walked my dogs, and he would always be out there walking his dogs. And when he moved, he let me transplant some of his plants into my yard, so I have a lot of plants in my yard from Joe Melinda's house, we've loved the house. We've loved working on it together, and we have a lot of stories about the house, which probably is too much to go into now, but let's just say there were other people living here with us, and on occasion still are, which has made me a firm believer that life does not end with the material
Do you have a
conclusion.
ghost story for us?
Yeah, we have ghosts.
Do you have a story?
We well, I've
Can
hundreds
you
of
just share
stories.
with us?
Sure. Well, when I came home after a band rehearsal, it was summer. I think it was about July around July 4th, and we just moved in, and we were sleeping upstairs, and there was a talk amongst the painters that there was a sound of a bouncing ball in one of the rooms, and I talked to the painter one day, and I said, "Well, Charlie, some of the guys had told me that they've heard some sounds in some of the rooms," and he said, "You're telling me somebody's been bouncing a ball in that room over there all day?" And so anyway, I came home from band practice that night, and Joyce says, "Well, don't stay after dark. Don't stay after dark, whatever you do." So band practice always runs late because the guys are always talking and cutting up, and so I got home right about 9 o'clock. But it's the June summer, so it's still a little bit just turning dark, and I come in, and my wife is kind of smiling, kind of frowning. She goes, "Where were you?" And I said, "Well, I'm here. It's just turning dark." And she says, "Yes, but you said you were going to be here before dark, and I've had to be here by myself." And I said, "Oh, okay." And then all of a sudden, I heard up above me. I said, "Oh, is Charlie still here?" She said, "No." I said, "Is that?" She said, "Yes." And I said, "You're kidding." Because it just sounded like, actually, and it moved across the floor. And it sounded like it was on that wooden floor, and it just clump, 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 clump. So we stood in this room over here, which is our TV room, and there was no furniture in there yet. And I just was amazed. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I just heard a ghost." And she was like, "Yeah, I've been hearing it all afternoon." So there was the bouncing ball and then that. And then the just most weirdest thing in my whole life. At that moment, as we stood there talking, and I was on the northeast side of the corner, and from the opposite side, it was actually up at the top of the door, the sliding door, a sound and a presence just swooped, and I could feel the whole swoop from over there to up and shoo. It just did this to me. And it was just like the Poltergeist movies. Just like when the ghosts go shh, and there was a sound to it. It was like a laughing, and it was like, I kid you not. I kid you not. And from that day on, anytime somebody tells me a ghost, I'm like, "Really? Yeah, I believe you." Because I do, and I've been there, and I've seen it, and I've heard it. And we had a medium come out to the house, and he did some reading on it, and he said, "Yeah, you've got ghosts." He said a lot of them were our family, and they were glad that we finally got a house of our own. And he said that there were some others too. He said this was sort of like a portal. He says there was the little boy, and he says there was the lady who sat on the bed in the middle bedroom and combed her hair, her long brown hair. He said that there were some pets, some animals, and as he began to describe them, we realized that they were our pets.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's quite an
One of them.
experience.
Yeah, it's pretty wild how they can read that stuff. I don't know. We've enjoyed the experience of living here and being involved in the community, and like I say, we're both very community active, and I'm a music teacher and a professional musician, which incidentally my father was a teacher. I'm not a teacher but a musician, and very much enjoyed music. He was always going around the house singing, and he had a trumpet, and he'd play his trumpet, and he would play kind of a poor version of Hello Dolly. Because he let his technique go for so long. But he would sing it, and he just do it with so much energy and enthusiasm. It was beautiful to hear. At that time, I didn't realize it, but now, as I become older, I just realize, what a beautiful thing that he was always singing. and always telling stories. Anyway, I'm a professional musician, and I found a receipt where his grandmother, my great grandmother, was renting a piano. So he never mentioned about having a piano in the house, but evidently they did at one time. They were paying $8 a month, and that piano was $350, which was a fortune back then. I found something stated my Aunt Rosa or whoever purchased the property, the house on Main Street, they paid $2,100 for it. I think it was $2,195 in 1901. So houses were $2,000, and cars were probably about $300. Well, it's really interesting. I found so many things that I thought are interesting, but this is really cute. This, maybe you've seen this before. This is a flyer that says Project Information Flyer, Main Street Road Improvements Beautification Project. Phase 1, study, concept, develop, and 30% plans preparation. Springfield growth, and it's this. I think this came out in '75 when the Springfield Preservation and Restoration Society developed, and they had the state of mind that they were going to improve the neighborhood and restore it to its rightful state, and it had become really declined back then. And then '75, that was probably the worst period. '75 in the '80s, and this house was a crack house. Most of the houses were crack houses in the late '70s and '80s. And I've got bullet holes right over here in this window that we've never repaired. It's beautiful leaded glass, so it's like a big deal to repair. This was a crack house. As in many of them were, and I think when the Improvement Society or the Preservation Society came about, you had a few people coming in, and then a few more, and then a few more, and the policemen, they had a name for us. What was it? Urban pioneers. They called us urban pioneers because they said, who the heck wants to go live down there? When we first moved in, and all right, this is not for the children, but when we first moved in, we had prostitutes on our street. So this is like 2005. Every night, especially during the warm months, they'd come like 4 of them, and they'd just come sauntering down, like right around dusk. They were like vampires, and they were transvestite prostitutes. They were male, dressed up like women, and I remember one time them coming. And there were like 4 of them. They were in a line. They were coming down the street like gunslingers, just like walking right down the middle of the street. And we had the darndest time getting rid of them. They were just about as hard as roaches to get rid of. They had a Facebook page, and they lived in Southside, and they would advertise in Southside, and their clients would come over here and meet them. And on big holiday nights, like 4th of July or football season, at 3 o'clock in the morning, there'd be 4 or 5 cars with their motors going right out here. And we'd call the police, and the police would come out. And one time, I called the police. This prostitute gets in the car with a guy right across the street. I'm calling the police. The police comes out, and he's doing a drive-by. And I'm watching from my window. I should have gone out there, but the prostitute and the guy are in the car. And the police does a drive-by, shines his light, shines it around, and then drives on. And I'm like, what? And then the prostitute and the John get up. The prostitute's putting herself together, and the John's like, looking, is he gone? Is he gone? And then gets back in his car and drives away. The darndest thing. So anyway, one of the prostitutes, my wife got in an altercation with him and sprained her finger. I think it might have even broke it. She had to have it reset. Yeah, they were mean. They were nasty. They carried guns and knives. They robbed a guy from City House. It's like 6 o'clock in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, he's going to work, and they're like, "Hey, what's up? Give me your money."
And this was in 2000 and
2005, 6, 7.
okay.
Then there was a big change, it seems, when we had a homeowner over here put up a camera, and he took some pictures, some video of an interaction between the prostitutes and we'll say a city employee, and he took that video and he played it for the city council. And after that, we've had no trouble. Everything's been great. Not a prostitute anywhere. So I wish we could say that about the roaches
Okay.
or the flies. But I'm sorry to belabor the point. But the support in the neighborhood has just really taken off. The Preservation Society, the Improvement Society, we have new businesses all over the place on Main Street springing up. Christina Parrish did an excellent job starting the Porch Fest, which is now continuing, and Kelly Rich has taken that over and doing a great job with that. In the park, they have some statues, some sculptures, which is very nice. There's one of the giraffe, which is supposed to symbolize the zoo, but I'm told that there was never a zoo. There was never a giraffe in the zoo, but it's a beautiful sculpture anyway. They also found the railing from the trolley, and when they were excavating, repairing the bridge that goes over the river up here, they dug down and they found the trolley railing with the gray-blue bricks that go around it, and so they let two of the people from the neighborhood, Jeff and Carol, go up there. She's our historian and he was our archaeologist, and they excavate it and they brought it back and they put it in the park. It looks beautiful. I walk by it every day. I walk my dogs up there, and every day I walk that route that old Buddy and Margaret walked. So it's kind of a beautiful thing to see. You're just following the footsteps that those people prepared for you.
All right.
And I appreciate it.